Oh, hi there. I want to talk about the movie Dunkirk. I watched it yesterday. Oh, I thought it was quite a good movie. A lot of very good special effects. The scenery all looked correct. I saw it in theaters, so there was some scenes that were quite intense because just the volume around with the surround sound speakers and everything. I saw it in a new theater. And yeah, from that aspect, it was a really good movie. It didn't really talk about certain things from different perspectives, though. It just illustrated what happened. And when I mean it didn't talk about different perspectives, as you know, there was no one main character throughout the whole movie. It alternated through different characters um, during the movie. Um, it was a quite interesting look at things. Um, Obviously, the Germans were on the offensive, but you rarely saw them. They would attack in planes. Um, you wouldn't see much of them. There was occasional fire from them from certain positions, but you never saw them. At the end, um, some German soldiers capture the pilot who had shot down one of the German planes just before it was able to attack. Um, and even then, like they're just blurred, vague. You can't really see them. And I think that made the movie better because the problem with um, the Western view of World War II is historically it's very, very slanted, and I'm sure it's even worse in places like Russia and things like that. But as far as it being on the movie screen goes, very slanted. And Brad Pitt has made that all the worse. He is, like a lot of people really like him. I do not. Uh, anyway, all that aside, um, it did show things, for the brutal honesty of it. Attacking unarmed, well, practically unarmed soldiers. I mean, the guns they had, it would be like 1 in 1,000 that they'd actually be able to shoot down a plane with a rifle like that. So they were pretty much defenseless. That is true. From a historical point of view, the Germans could have crushed them if they wanted to, but Hitler opted not to. But that's not to say they didn't, you know, shoot down some boats and some practically defenseless soldiers on the beach. That's not saying that at all. I mean, this is something that should have been worked out long ago, but it wasn't. One thing that I was glad it was in the movie, but it kind of pissed me off, like as it would anyone. Uh, there was a character named George in it. A young man played by Barry Cogan, and he went there to help, and he went there to help bring back soldiers, and he was really trying. And they only call him the Shivering Soldier, Sicilian Murphy. Um, I can see, being traumatized by an event like that, but his actions led to George falling down some stairs and eventually dying. So this concept that a lot of people have just because you're in a Canadian uniform in World War II, that everything's all good, is complete inaccuracy. They were people in every army who were cunts. And this shivering soldier was most certainly a cunt. And I know people don't like to hear it, but it's the truth. In every army, especially in World War II, there were people who were total shitheads on any side. There were people who, total self-interest. They didn't care about anybody else but themselves, and therefore they had no problem um, sending guys off to die while they're somewhere off safe. As you saw in the movie, there were officers at um, on the beach waiting to be picked up as well, but they were sent there by other officers who were at home sipping, whiskey, and like the war was so far away from them. And the thing is, it's well known that the British, um, their officers were in some ways more dangerous than the Nazis, uh, especially in World War One. Oh God, were they terrible! Just absolutely vicious people. Um, and so it's a very a difficult topic because obviously those officers, their grandchildren are alive, and obviously they don't want themselves being painted in that view. But the truth is what it is. I mean, it was just a really crazy situation where there were a lot of people, and most of them were young. Most of them were early 20s and things like that. They don't know fuck all. I remember when I was in my early 20s. I'd have been no better off than a lot of the soldiers on the beach. I wouldn't know what to do. I would have just been pushed and prodded in one direction. And there's just like little things, like the French soldier who got on the boat by stealing Englishmen's clothes or English soldiers' clothes. Um, they kind of try to look at it from different aspects in the movie. Like they made it a point of going, "Oh, did he kill a British soldier to get on here or not?" And then another guy's like, "Well, no, there were plenty of dead British soldiers. He probably just took his clothes. I saw him do it." And it's just like, well, whatever. But in actual fact, in reality, um, if they'd have found him on there, they would have gone rancid on him. That's what happened. That's not what that happened in the movie, but that is what happened in real life. And they noticed that he had been on the boat and not supposed to have been there because he wasn't speaking. He didn't say a word, and they thought he was a German. Well, he wasn't. He was French. And even so, back then, doing that is enough to get like a severe penalty. I have no idea what happened to that person in real life, but that would have earned you a severe penalty. And that's a bunch of bullshit. Leaving French guys behind because they were French. Um, he did a very clever thing by, going, well, I got to get out of here, man, or something bad's going to happen to me. And you can't blame him at all for wanting to jump on that boat. And, taking clothes off a dead man, I wouldn't recommend doing it, but in his situation, it made sense. So, I have no idea what kind of punishment he got afterwards because the thing is, they were very strict. They still are very strict in the military, and back then it may have even earned him a trip to the firing range. I don't know. I didn't look into that. I'd never even heard that story before, but it makes perfect sense that someone would be just a little bit smaller, not smaller, a little bit smarter than the average peon that they sent to, go fight this war. Because most of the people didn't know how to do anything. Like they knew how to take orders and they knew how to load a weapon, and that was about all they knew. And maybe, when they were growing up on a farm or something like that, maybe they know a little bit about that. I don't know. Um, yeah, the movie wasn't too terribly long, less than 2 hours, I believe. They really could have made it longer if they wanted to. I'd have enjoyed it more, but my sore throat condition it made it difficult to sit still. It's totally separate things altogether. But most assuredly, I will buy it on the DVD when it comes out. Ain't no need to buy it on Blu-ray. I mean, Blu-ray is a little bit better, but nothing wrong with DVD. And I do not want to buy a digital copy. Okay, I don't want to do it. And there are reasons for that I'm not going to get into in this video because this video is about Dunkirk and how I recommend that people watch it. Uh, Very, very good movie. The intensity was there when you heard bullets being fired, and explosions and things like that. It was intense. It was intense seeing those British soldiers under the water and them holding their breath because a plane had crashed and there was this big fire pit above them, and had to go up to air eventually, and they went up and they burnt. That was I don't know, like I know as a young person I could have watched that and walked away and not thought twice about it because I just it wouldn't have made sense to me. But looking at it now, I'm going, ooh, that's intense, yo, very intense. Um, and stuff like that happened all the time in World War II. And you know, those sort of things happened, and a lot of people don't like to talk about World War II. A lot of people don't like to think about it. But you know, the problem with not thinking about it, and the problem with not wanting to have anything to do with it, is that you build the aspects of it that made it possible in the first place. And it was ignorance that made World War II possible. I mean, a lot of people didn't know certain things. And when you take that part out of history, and these same people, the same generation, later on forgets them, or doesn't remember them, or doesn't think to learn them, um, it's just like the whole thing could happen all over again. And it's the fault of political and military leaders on all sides that were the cause of that war. So um, you know, a lot of people go, well, I have a relative who was wounded on D-Day or something like that, so therefore I do not like the Germans. But that's an ignorant view of things because we'll say it was different. Let's say you had a relative that was on the German side. Like he would have been programmed to, shoot at that person just the same. I mean, just because he was on German side, whose side who had done a lot of bad things, it doesn't mean that if you were in that position, you would have behaved any differently. You just wouldn't have had a choice. Especially if you go in as a young person, you don't know anything, you're just a private, you don't make decisions, and you see someone coming at you and you know they're coming to kill you, then sure, you're going to take a shot at them. I don't hold any bias against any soldier taking a shot at another soldier because you're both there, whether that's what you'd want to be doing or not, trying to shoot the other person. So if they shoot you first, that's it's a really bad place to be, but and it is understandable to have a little bit of a bias about it, but you got to look at things from a wider perspective. Um, and like there are things like I actually don't like Canadian politics. I don't like them at all. A lot of decisions have been made since then that I personally don't agree with, and they wouldn't have happened under different leadership. But all that aside, we were supposed to be talking about Dunkirk. Uh, I'm learning now that I've checked IMDb that Tom Hardy was in it. I thought I recognized him, but oh yeah, right, that's who he was. Yeah, I thought it was him, but he didn't have too massive a role. He had a mask on most of the time. That's kind of why I didn't entirely recognize him, but he played his part well. Um, I think this movie was a very important thing to make, and I think people should try to have a broader view of things before they make snap decisions. Um, yeah, I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with my opinion. Actually, a few more generations down the road, um, the ideological beliefs that complete the whole story of World War II will be easier to tell because the bias of surviving peoples of that war and the relatives that remember the stories of the survivors of that war will be watered down. So it'll be easier to depict World War II as a whole story in future generations because people who will contradict it, who have biased opinion because it was traumatic for them, um, will either be dead or, the generations that follow them will not understand the story in the same context that they did. And I mean, it's not to knock on Canadian soldiers. I'm not trying to do that because a lot of them, were heroic and did great things. But I'm just saying, if they were planted in Germany and had to live with the situation going on over there, they would have been the people that they hated when they fought them, um, just because of circumstance. I mean, obviously, it doesn't make it right when any particular person does something particularly sadistic. But in wartime, you're in a fighter plane and you shoot down another fighter plane. That's just war. Um, Obviously, if that was your great grandfather or grandfather, that would piss you off. But you can't use it as an excuse for future politics in dealing with uh, people of German um, from Germany or just the ideological beliefs that were behind that war. Because when people think of the ideological beliefs behind that war, um, usually because they're stupid, they think about the violence, they think about the fighting, and they think about the trauma and terrorism and all this sorts of stuff. But the ideological beliefs and the political system that they were trying to bring into effect, uh, that isn't actually entirely the same thing. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the German army, British army, Russian army, Canadian army, and all that, the Americans, they were not one single fighting unit. They were all going off in different directions. They were all filled with leaders who were hotheads, who were arrogant, um, and were difficult to control and tell what to do. So, because one sector of a particular country's army does one thing, that doesn't mean you can blame the whole country as a whole for that happening. Because in the chaos of the war, so much stuff was going on that it was just impossible to have someone consolidate their power to an absolute. And anyone who was able to do that at any point uh, was forced to be particularly brutal. Um, that was how they affected their policies. And, desperation, fear, chaos, um, it, all these things play into factors. And it's, concepts I've, vaguely described in this video, but it's something that a lot of people don't understand and never want to understand. And it is because they are pig ignorant. And I don't care what country you come from. If you go in with the mindset that they're bad because they're German, they're bad because they're Russian, they're bad because they were British, or whatever, then you are a stupid asshole and it doesn't matter what you think. Anyway, Dunkirk, awesome movie. Um, the politics of the war is not much of a factor in that movie. It's just what happened. They were on the beach, they got fired at a little bit, and they were able to get home. That was the premise of the movie. And that's what I think made it good. So I would give it a definite 5 out of 5. So anyway, that's my opinion. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.